On first down, they hand off to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, I-N-D-Y. And again, it's picked off. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with a second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac. Kenny Moore gets to Deshaun Watson. That's a sack for Kenny Moore. Kenny has a pick and now a sack in the game.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Bring the Juice podcast. I am your host, Cody Felger. Joining me, we have a very special guest today. If you've happened to listen to an Indianapolis Colts game over the past 2 seasons, you've probably undoubtedly heard his voice on the call. Please welcome voice of the Colts, special guest, Mr. Matt Taylor. Matt, thanks for coming on, man. How are you doing?
My pleasure. I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me. How are you?
Absolutely. I'm doing well, man. And obviously with this virus, a lot of stuff has changed. From really everywhere has been impacted. And I'm curious, Matt, how has life been for you, both personally and at work with this virus?
Well, in the background here, you might hear a toddler and a screaming newborn. So I apologize for that, but that's part of the deal with the new normal and the stay-at-home mandate that we're all under here right now. But yes, it's great because I am at home. I get to see them more often. But I still got to stay engaged, still got to work. But life is great. I mean, I couldn't. I've got no reason to complain because we're still talking football. We're going to have a draft in a couple of days. Life as we know it from an NFL standpoint really hasn't stopped. It's changed, but it hasn't stopped altogether as far as the offseason goes. So there's still plenty to talk about. They're still keeping me busy, but we're just doing it from a different place right now. So I'm on the south side of Indianapolis. Got a little, nook here or an office here that I've turned into a makeshift studio, and we're just making do, but we're still having fun.
Awesome. That's so exciting. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm incredibly blessed.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, this offseason, you mentioned things have changed, but you've obviously spoken to several new of the signees that the Colts have brought in. You've talked with Frank Reich. You've probably talked with Chris Ballard over video chat as well. So I'm curious, despite the limitations that obviously you can't go back into the Colts facility right now, nobody can really go anywhere. But what's been your overall impression of kind of these new guys that have been brought to the Colts organization?
Yeah, to me, overall, these signings prove to me that the Colts are in a win-now mode. They're ready to take off, and they just felt like they needed a handful of pieces to get them over the top because the core of their team is young and it's under financial control. So their window of opportunity right now is open. It's wide open. So they felt like they needed to upgrade at quarterback. They certainly did that with Phillip Rivers. And then one of their biggest positions of need and growth on their defense, they addressed that as well by bringing in a stud 3 technique, a great defensive tackle in DeForest Buckner. Now, obviously, they had to give up a lot to get him in terms of draft equity. They shipped their 13th overall selection to the San Francisco 49ers, but the 49ers had so many assets along their defensive line that they couldn't keep everybody, under the salary cap as they sit here presently. So they needed to get rid of somebody, and I hate to put it that way, but they were willing to give up DeForest Buckner in exchange for something. And the Colts felt like, hey, DeForest Buckner is better right now at that key position for us on defense as we play a 4-3. He's better now than any prospect we're going to get with that 13th pick. So that's why they made the move. Plus, DeForest Buckner's a proven commodity, a Pro Bowler, an All-Pro player. Plus, he's still young, and they signed him to an extension. So they're still getting a guy with tremendous upside that can come in right away and help this defense and help that defensive line create a push, get a push up front. That was a huge problem last year. The Colts just did not have enough pressure and enough consistent pressure to alter plays and to get in the face of quarterbacks. I mean, last year the Colts only had 3.5 sacks from their interior defensive line as a team. That's just not going to get it done. And so many times I just have this mental image in my mind of a quarterback just stepping up, sliding into the pocket, and completing passes down the field. The Colts allowed, again, 70% completion percentage to opposing quarterbacks for the second straight year. That's the first time in NFL history that's ever been done. So they needed someone up front in the interior of their defensive line to create a push to where that quarterback's got nowhere to go. He can't go outside because you've got Justin Houston there. You got Kamoko Toure there, and you can't step up into the pocket because you're going to have guys like Danico Autry and DeForest Buckner hopefully creating problems there as well. So it's going to help everybody. It's going to help, obviously, the pass rushers. It's going to help the linebackers because theoretically they're going to be scraping free. You know, Darius Leonard's hopefully not going to have to deal with as many, double teams or people on his way in order to make plays. And it's certainly going to help the secondary. So those two, moves, the biggest one certainly so far this season for the Colts. And I think it's addressed two of their biggest needs or two of their biggest problem areas from 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Matt, a little bit more about you before we want to make this really a draft central type of interview and kind of talking here, conversation. But I'm curious just a little bit about you. So you've now been in your new role as the voice of the Colts for over a year now. You started in the 2018 season, right before the season started. And then you also, obviously, last year were the voice of the Colts the entire way through. I'm curious for you. Now you have 2 full seasons under your belt. What's kind of your story? How did you work your way up to where you are now? Kind of curious about that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, long story short, I'll give you sort of the Cliff Note version of it. I mean, I was that 10-year-old kid that knew exactly what I wanted to do at a very young age. And so my entire, I would say educational life. And then, after college life, it was all about how do I best put myself in a situation to do play-by-play, but then do it at a high level for a professional football team. That was always my goal. So I graduated college and I had a million part-time jobs. One of them was working at MS Communications in Indianapolis, and they had the rights to the Colts. They were the flagship station of the Colts. And so working there, I immediately started to pick up on how the business side of it worked, kind of how it was structured. And each team does it differently, but how the Colts do it, they own their entire broadcast, right? So they hire the talent, they pay the talent. They have all the inventory in terms of spots and commercials. They do all their production work. And so working at MS and kind of seeing how the Colts operated gave me an understanding of how I need to best position myself from a career standpoint. So worked at MS Communications, 1070 The Fan in Indianapolis. Worked there for about 4.5 years. Got a phone call from the Colts, and they were kind of noticing my work, and they gave me an opportunity to come over there, gave me a job to essentially run their entire radio network and be in charge of all of the radio production, basically do everything except, call the game. So my fingerprints and DNA were kind of over everything. This is in 2012. So I did that, and it really, starting in 12, every year after that, I started to pick up more and more responsibility within the team. I was doing sideline reporting a year in on our game day broadcast, on top of producing all the shows and coming up with content for the shows. I was doing some TV, weekly TV hosting, some Colts television program hosting. Then I was doing play-by-play for our preseason TV games. So there was nothing really that I hadn't done in my media time with the Colts. So I like to think in about 7 or 8 years, I've built up a lot of loyalty and have showed my versatility and have showed my career flexibility. So when the time came in 2018, when they needed to make a switch at play-by-play, I like to think because of the loyalty I showed and my ability and again my versatility, that I was top of mind to be given a shot, to be given an opportunity. And so I did the 2018 season under the interim role, and was very, very fortunate, was very blessed to have that, tag, if you will, taken off, and then given the full-time position starting in the playoffs of 2018. And then last year, I guess you could say 2019 was my first year as the official voice of the Colts, if you will. But like I said, it's an absolute dream job. It's a dream come true for me to be able to live 15 minutes away from Lucas Oil Stadium and to do play-by-play for a professional team in this market, a market in which I grew up, and I don't have to move to do it. I get to keep my family here. I mean, that's not lost on me, and it's also not lost on me on how big of an opportunity it is and how much of a responsibility it is. So it's something I don't take lightly, and it's the NFL, right? I mean, even it holds true for the players. It's definitely true for the coaches, but I think it pertains to me as well. I got to put my best foot forward because we're all day to day, we're all year to year in this. There's a million people that would love to have my job, that would like to take me out of the seat that I'm in. So I've got to bring it every day, if you will, every game, and do the best I can. But it is very, very cool to be able to narrate and do play-by-play of these games for hundreds of thousands of people that listen to Colts football, not only in Central Indiana, but all over the world.
Yeah. I'm curious, Matt. So you mentioned you started at Emmis, started working there, and now you've transitioned into this role, you said, fully in 2019. How has your perception kind of changed starting in this new role now? Is it harder? Is it more fun? How have you felt about it?
Well, it's different. Like I said, I was overseeing and doing everything except for play-by-play, and then now I'm doing play-by-play as well. And so what we've had to do from a business structure standpoint, we've hired someone under me, so to speak, to take a lot of that load off of me from a production standpoint. This person is kind of my right-hand man. I'm an extension of him, and he's an extension of me. We kind of think the same. His name is Casey Vallier, and he just does a tremendous job, and he's an unbelievable asset for us. So without him, I'm not sure where I'd be and where we would be from a department standpoint, from a radio perspective. But he definitely helps me get ready for game day, on top of doing a zillion other things. But it's like I said, it's truly an honor, and it's kind of like being a player. I played college football, high school football, so I understood like the grind of getting ready for games. You practice, you watch film, you lift, you do all these things to get ready for game day. My job is kind of the same. I'm a freak about preparation. I over prepare. My motto is I use 10% of 100% of my prep every game day, but you don't know what that 10% is going to be. The game dictates the information you relay to the listener based on how the game is unfolding. So I just like to be ready to go for anything, any situation or any play that could unfold during a game. I like to be able to put that into perspective. So I got to be ready to go. So I watch a lot of film, and I'm not going to bore you with the amount of prep I do, but it's a lot and it takes time. And so I kind of feel like I'm a player or coach, in that I'm still grinding, Monday through Saturday. And then if you're ready to go on Sunday, the game should be easy because of your preparation. So it's a lot of work, but listen, it beats having a real job. As I always say, it's a total blast. And Sunday game day is like the reward for all that work that you put in throughout the week.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm curious, kind of piggybacking off of that, take me through kind of your game day prep. Normally it seems like the last few years the Colts have played a lot of their home games at 1 p.m. So take me through kind of your game day prep on a typical Sunday 1 p.m. game. And then I'm curious after that, how about like if a game changes times, it gets flexed to a different time, or if it's an away game, if it's a Sunday night game, Thursday night game, how does your preparation kind of change within that?
Well, the prep, the game time of the game doesn't really matter to me in terms of prep. Just to give you a basic glimpse of how, a normal week works for me during the season, we'll play the game on Sunday, right? And once the game is over, you're kind of tying up all the loose ends from the game, and you're getting ready for all of our weekly programming that we still have. That's one thing that I don't think a lot of people understand is we still have weekly programming, weekly talk shows that we do that are Colts shows. We have the inventory for it, like I said. So on Monday we do a Coach Reich, wrap up show, and then we've got shows Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then we have like a preview show on Friday, plus all the podcast stuff that we're doing, plus short little updates that we have on 1070 The Fan and other MS communication stations. So there is tons that keep us busy during the week. But from a game day preparation standpoint, I've got offensive statistics, defensive statistics for the team. I've got individual offense and defense numbers that I tabulate and kind of put together and organize in my own way because it's how I prefer it to look. It just makes sense to me. Doing play-by-play is kind of like, it's kind of like there's no right or wrong answer. It's just it's my handwriting, and sometimes only you can read your own handwriting. I kind of equate it to like your game day prep. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just whatever works for you, or in this case, whatever works for me. So I do that, and then I have like cheat sheets, player like cheat sheets that I use. They kind of double and triple as like starting lineup sheets, but then also information on players, and they also kind of acts as a spotting chart as well. It's kind of unique to what I do. I really haven't seen anybody else do it that way, but again, it just whatever works for me. And then from a player standpoint, there's 53 guys on each team going into a game. Now, obviously, you can only dress 46, but you got to be ready to go on game day for 106 guys to play. So what I do is anybody that could be in the game, I make like a player profile sheet, and I got it on a Word document. And so anybody that can be in the game has a player profile sheet. And then let's say, T.Y. Hilton has a big game. I can type in T.Y. Hilton on my computer within my profile sheet file. Then I can go and I can talk about all the things that are relative to T.Y. Hilton that given day based on the notes and the preparation that I've gathered and organized heading into the game. So like I said, I'm a prep freak. I like to think no one's going to outwork me and prep me because I just like to be able to put things into perspective and give the listener the most insightful knowledge on the situation of the game at that particular time. So I take a lot of pride in it, and it's something that I probably overwork at it, but it's just like Vince Lombardi used to say, failure to prepare is preparing to fail. And I think that applies to even broadcasting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, you spent a lot of time talking to players, talking to coaches. You mentioned some preseason announcing, and there's a ton more that we can't get into. But I'm curious now, over your years with the Colts, whether that be not in this role and also within this role, who's been one of your favorite players or coaches? I know there's probably a lot to talk to on or off the field. Who's been one of those guys that just has kind of that polarizing personality?
Oh man, there's been so many. I mean, we've been so fortunate to have, no matter the year, again, I've been there since 2012. We haven't really had, I can probably count on one hand the amount of like just bad guys. And I shouldn't say bad guys, but just guys that weren't, willing to talk to you or that just got put off by an interview. Like we've had so many good guys that are they understand what we're trying to do, and they're compliant to it, and they're kind of genuinely happy to talk to you. But I would say like guys that really stand out. I loved Pierre Desir, and I know he's no longer on the team, but he was such a good guy, and his background, where he came from. I always loved talking to him. I'm still talking to Jack Doyle. He's still on the team, and he's just such a good guy. Joe Wrights was always a fantastic interview. Gosh darn, you're putting me on the hot seat here. Let me think about it if you don't mind, because there's just been so many good guys that have come through the locker room that have been good interviews that have given us good insight.
Mm-hmm. Sure. But I'm also curious, Matt, now being the voice of the Colts for for 2 years, and you said 1 year at full time with that position. What has been your favorite game to call so far, and why?
Wow, my favorite game might have been the Giants game in 2018. It was at the end of this season. I think it was the home finale for the Colts. And if you remember, the Colts were on that string of, they started 1-5, but then they won 9 of their last 10. And again, late in the season, so playoff implications all over the place. It's late in the year, so you start getting into, well, the Colts got to win, and they need help from so and so. And I can't remember, the teams and all the scenarios, but it was one of those things where if the Colts took care of business, if the Colts won, then they were going to be in a position the week after that, heading into week 17, to play in a win-in-your-end game against the Tennessee Titans. So had they lost that game, they would not have made the playoffs, and week 17 probably wouldn't have mattered. I know they mathematically would not have been eliminated, but you know how that goes. So it's one of those games where it just, the Giants weren't very good. On paper, the Colts were the favorite, but it's the NFL, so it was one of those games where they just weren't playing well. They had a hard time generating momentum, that kind of thing, but they kind of got their act together in the second half. And Eli Manning, the Colts scored a late touchdown. Eli Manning goes down the field, and I think the Colts are up by less than a field goal. So if the Giants go down and kick one at the end, obviously the Colts would have lost. But Eli Manning drops back to throw and fires one high, and Malik Hooker picks it off. And I just, at that moment, it was so exciting because it was, it meant that the Colts were going to win that football game. But like I said, it also meant that the Colts were set up the week after that to play in a essentially a pseudo playoff game, winning your end and you make the playoffs. So I think I realized at that moment, hey, the Colts are essentially going to the playoffs. They're going to have a huge game next week. I understood what that meant. So I was excited for that. Selfishly, I was really pumped to be a part of that from a broadcaster standpoint. So I would say that is probably my favorite game because it was dramatic and what it meant for the week after that. And then, to ultimately make the playoffs. Plus Malik Hooker had that great interception. So I thought the call was fun, and, the crowd was behind me the whole time on that call. And it was just a fun game. And then, of course, the result was awesome and what it meant for the week after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and looking at that 2018 season, it was a roller coaster season. I mean, the Colts started 1-5, and then they go all the way to making the playoffs and winning a wild card game. I'm curious for you. That's your first year as the guy calling the plays, or not calling the plays, I guess, telling everybody what's happening, and you have a great perspective of being able to see the plays live and telling people about it. I'm curious for you, what was that like there in 2018, seeing that team going from basically the pit all the way to being one of the best teams in the NFL? What was your kind of perspective, looking back on it now, just seeing the way that the Colts kind of defied the doubters, especially after starting off so poorly as they did in 2018?
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, you start 1-5, but you had so many close games. I mean, the one that immediately pops into my brain is the season opener against the Cincinnati Bengals, and they, Jack Doyle catches the ball, then has it stripped from him, and then Cincinnati literally snatches victory out of the jaws of defeat with that play right there. So the season kind of starts on a sour note, and then injuries make everything hard, and you had some growing pains with the offense. I think just not everybody fully up to speed on a new system there with Frank Reich and Nick Sirianni. But you saw this was a good team. They just needed to put some things together, and it wasn't going to be hard for them to take those close losses and turn them into close wins or double-digit wins. So obviously you go 1-5, you lose to the Patriots on Thursday Night Football. I've never seen a team more decimated by injuries than the Colts on that short week in New England. I mean, it was just – by the end of the game, I think the number was like 34, 35 healthy players. It was just unreal. And so after that, let's be honest. The Colts got a little bit healthier. and the schedule started to lighten up a little bit. And so they started to take care of business. They absolutely killed the Buffalo Bills, and then they took care of business. They got a huge win against the Texans in that stretch. They beat the Titans. They won a couple of close games. They beat the Dolphins on a walk-off field goal, I think. So, the only blemish in that run to the end of the season was that weird game in Jacksonville. But it was just fun to see, Frank Reich's motto, his mantra of 1-0, just get better today, 1% better. It sounds cliche. It sounds corny, but being on the inside and watching practice, interviewing Frank, they truly believed it. Like, let's not worry about next week, because next week doesn't matter if we don't take care of business this week. If we lose this week, then we're mathematically going to give ourselves an even, steeper hill to climb here to reach the playoffs. So it was really cool to see everybody be singularly focused on, hey, we got a game this week and we're going to take care of business this week. And then next week we'll do the same thing. That 1-0 approach that they adopted, and it became so famous and they still use today. So it was really fun to be a part of that season, kind of on the outside looking in, but also on the inside, just being around the guys and talking to the guys on the business trips and, on the plane rides, stuff like that, to see how focused and dialed in they were to become the third team ever to start a season 1-5 and then go on to make the playoffs.
Yeah. And Matt, last year, it kind of seemed like it was the opposite way, where the Colts started off very hot. I believe they were 5-2, beat the defending, the Super Bowl champions now, Kansas City Chiefs. And then for some reason, whether that be injury, other factors, they started to slide, and they finished with an under 500 record, 7-9. I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think happened? What happened to cause that backslide in the second half of the season for the Colts in 2019?
Yeah, I think a lot of things. I mean, this is going to sound like excuses, and the Colts certainly don't make any excuses, but it just seemed like after that 5-2 start and the Colts are heading into Pittsburgh. I mean, if you go back to that season, Colts are 5-2. At one point, they're the 2 seed in the AFC playoffs. And then looking at the schedule ahead, I think you had Pittsburgh, Miami, and Denver. And then maybe someone else, I forget at the time, I don't have it pulled up in front of me, another team that was under 500. So you're saying to yourself, boy, the Colts, if they can just take care of business here, you're looking at, 8-2, 9-2. Wow, how crazy would that be? But then, of course, Jacoby Brissett gets hurt in the second quarter against Pittsburgh, and that game didn't go well. And really, that was kind of like the line of demarcation for the entire rest of the season in terms of Jacoby's numbers. Everybody points to that game, that injury, the 5-2 Jacoby, and then, the 2-7 Colts the rest of the way. They played a lot of close games. They had 11 games decided by one score. They lost 5 of those games late in the season. They couldn't get off the field defensively. The Buccaneers threw for a ton of yards. Same thing for the Titans. Same thing against the Saints. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier with DeForest Buckner and no push up the middle that just killed the Colts secondary. Plus, they had injuries in the secondary. I point to Kenny Moore going down. He didn't play the last quarter of the season, and I thought that really hurt the Colts because they just didn't have anybody they could plug in to match his production and his skill. Playing that versatile nickel corner position. So injuries hurt. I mean, I haven't even talked about the wide receivers. T.Y. Hilton misses 6 games. Devin Funchess misses essentially 15 and a half games. Eric Ebron goes on IR. Chester Rogers goes on IR. So there wasn't a lot of bright spots after that Pittsburgh game, and that was a game they probably still could have won had Brian Hoyer he came in relief of that game, but I still felt like enough plays could have been made in order to win that game with the backup quarterback. So it was just kind of a raw season, and especially with the way it ended in Week 17 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. You got a rookie quarterback that's drafted in the 7th round with a team or on a team that's got nothing to play for, and the Colts were still playing for something. They had an outside shot of making the playoffs that day, or or I beg your pardon, I think their playoff shot was ended the week before. But nevertheless, they were trying to get to 8-8 and salvage a non-losing season. So they kind of went out on a sour note in week 17, which made the season even more disappointing because you ended up with a 7-9 season and a losing season for the second time in 3 years.
Mm-hmm. And in that 2019 draft, the Colts drafted 10 guys, 10 players. What was your take on how some of these guys performed here in year one?
Well, I think there's a lot to like. In the secondary, I think Rock Yassine's going to be a good one. He had a roller coaster of a rookie season. There were times where he would play really, really well, but then he would struggle. The game that immediately comes to mind in that regard is the Denver game when I think he was flagged, 5 or 6 times. Cortland Sutton got the best of him in that game. Bobby Okereke is going to be a stud, and they got to find a way to keep him on the field. And you saw that later in the season when they would play a little bit more base defense. And I think it kind of coincided with Bobby emerging and also Kenny Moore going out. They decided to keep Bobby on the field more at that Sam linebacker position. And I think Khari Willis is going to be a stud too. And, as we sit here and talk right now, Clayton Gathers has not been re-signed in free agency. So it makes sense that they're kind of banking on and projecting Khari to take over that strong safety position. And he played well last year. He had his ups and downs as well. But for a rookie to come in, drafted in the 4th round, I thought he acquitted himself very, very nicely. And he and Malik Hooker should make a nice little duo in the back end of that safety position. So those are the guys that immediately stand out to me. But then you look at the season that Paris Campbell had. I mean, what a raw deal. I mean, you got 4 injuries. You have to have 3 surgeries. And he's just bursting with potential. So I'm excited to see what he looks like kind of in a redo, if you will, of his rookie season. So I thought 2019, I think eventually it's going to rival what we saw in 2018 from a draft perspective in terms of impactful talent. Obviously, 18 yielded Quentin Nelson and Darius Leonard. 19 is not going to have like the Pro Bowlers and the All Pros immediately, but I think longevity-wise, 19 is going to hold up to be a really, really, really good draft class for the Colts.
Mm-hmm. And now moving on, sticking with the draft here, moving on to the 2020 NFL Draft. It's coming up very, very soon. It's taking place April 23rd to the 25th. I mean, right now, as it stands for the Colts, they don't have a first-round pick, so really, unless they trade back in, 24th and 25th of April. I'm curious for you, what do you as the voice of the Colts do on draft weekend?
So on Thursday night and Friday night of the draft, we actually have a live draft radio show. So we keep busy. We start at 7:00 on our flagship station, 1070 The Fan in Indianapolis, and we have live pick-by-pick analysis. And obviously, we're going to sprinkle in some Colts combo on Thursday night because, as you said, they don't have a first-round pick. But on Friday night, we'll broadcast the entire second round and talk heavy Colts. Right now, the Colts have 2 picks in the second round. So we'll just talk football, for about, 6 hours total on Thursday and Friday of the draft. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. And like I said, we, from a production standpoint, we put a lot of work into it. We put a lot of emphasis on it, on making it sound good to kind of rival, what you hear from a radio standpoint on ESPN or Sirius XM. So we're pretty proud of it. And it's pick-by-pick analysis and, why it made sense, why it didn't make sense. We'll talk about the next upcoming pick and just kind of roll. So we'll do that starting Thursday night of the draft from 7:00 until the end of the round, which is probably going to be around 11:30.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk more about the draft. I'm sure I don't know if you would do mock drafts or not, but if not, you've been able to see a lot of different mock drafts that people have done. I know one of your guys that works for you, Jake Arthur, does a lot of mock drafts and stuff like that. I'm curious for you, looking at, you've watched the Colts from 2019. For you, what are some of your top positions of need for the Colts in this 2020 draft?
Wide receiver. You just start right there. I mean, right now the Colts have 10 wide receivers on their roster, and 5 of them haven't caught a pass in the NFL. And again, I know Paris Campbell's coming back, Zach Pascal's coming back, T.Y. Hilton's coming back, but T.Y. is going to be 30, which is not to say he's not still productive, but he's getting up there in age a little bit. So you got to start thinking about the long term. But this team just needs big-bodied receivers, and they need playmakers. They just need guys that can go up and make contested catches in critical situations, like third down, red zone, game on the line, that kind of thing. And the good news is this draft is full of receivers, impactful guys you can get, I've read, all the way up until maybe the 4th or 5th round. So the good news is the Colts aren't going to have to give up a lot of draft equity or move up or anything like that to get guys that can come in right away and play and contribute for next season. So, last year was it just seems like every year there's one position group, there's one area of the team that's hit really hard by injuries. And last year that was wideout. I mean, it just seemed like anybody of substance was nailed with a serious injury last year. So I'm looking forward to the Colts grabbing at least one, maybe two impactful rookie receivers to sprinkle in on this team and get better, because iron sharpens iron, and the Colts need more depth and more of a push to get more production from their wideout position. I mean, Zach Pascal last year, I think, was the leading receiver for the Colts at like 657 yards. That had to have been the least amount of yards to lead a team in receiving. The Colts' yards per attempt last year just wasn't where it needs to be. If you talk to Frank Reich, the big playability wasn't there. The explosive plays, the 20-yard gains. The Colts were 30th in the NFL in that category last year. So, I mean, just think about Cody, how many more games the Colts would have won had they been able to get, 2 or 3 more explosive plays to take less stress off of that running game. The Colts last year lost so many games in unique fashion. And what I mean by that is, the Colts would rush for 150, 160 yards and not turn the ball over and win time of possession and still lose. Like that's hard to do. And a big reason why is because they just didn't have many explosive plays on offense. I immediately think back to that Houston game on the road on Thursday night when the Colts did so many things well to win that game. They just couldn't close it out because I think their longest completion of that game was 14 yards. So I think that's where Phillip Rivers comes in. And I think that's where getting more explosiveness at wide receiver comes in to help take some of the stress off of the running game, which is so weird to say being, Colts followers, because for years it was all about the passing game and then trying to get that running game going. Well, 2019 was bizarro world. It was like Twilight Zone for the Colts, where they were so good at rushing the ball, and then the passing game just lacked in so many areas.
Mm-hmm. Last question for you, Matt. You mentioned Phillip Rivers and his quarterback position. I'm curious, where do you stand right now in the quarterback position? Obviously, you bring in Phillip Rivers on a 1-year, $25 million deal, but you got to look at it from, you mentioned even with the wide receiver position, what's going to be the future at your quarterback position? We know that Phillip Rivers is probably not going to be your franchise quarterback for the next 5 years. I'm curious, in this draft, would you take a quarterback, or and if you would, where would you take him at?
Well, one thing that we all know about Chris Ballard is he's not going to reach. He's not going to reach for any player, and he's definitely not going to reach for a quarterback, because we've seen that blow up. I got a stat for you. I want to read it to you, but I got to find it in terms of quarterbacks. I mean, there's no guarantee. There's no sure things at quarterback. And I saw this the other day when talking about quarterbacks. There have been 28 quarterbacks drafted in the top 5 since 1999. Now, obviously, the Colts are not in a position to get a quarterback in the top 5, but it is interesting. So 28 quarterbacks drafted in the top 5 since 1999. So we're going back 20 years. Half of those picks have a career losing record, and only one of them has delivered a Super Bowl. And that's Eli Manning, right? So, I mean, just because you're drafting a guy that high and you think he's going to take over as your franchise quarterback, it's not a sure thing. In fact, it's far from a sure thing. So getting back to the Colts, I think they're doing the best job they can to manage their quarterback situation. There's not going to be, a perfect quarterback scenario does not exist given the position they were in when your franchise quarterback decides to retire 2 weeks before a season. Like, they're just trying the best they can. And that's what I mean as far as they're in a win now mode. So let's go get the guy right now that gives us the best chance to win, and that's Phillip Rivers. So I think there's a lot that's going to go into the next 12 months. There's so many variables that are going to dictate what the Colts look like and what they do at quarterback for the long term. I mean, it might be one of those things where, hopefully Phillip Rivers plays well enough that maybe he can get another contract. Maybe he gets another 1-year contract extension at the end of this season. Or it could be Jacoby Brissett, who right now looks like he's going to be the backup for 2020. Maybe they turn the reins back over to him in 2021 after growing some more and learning some more. We talked to Nick Sirianni this offseason about Jacoby. They still love him as a quarterback. They say he makes all the right reads and makes all the right decisions. They just want him to speed that up a little bit. They just want those decisions to be made a little bit quicker, and they obviously want the accuracy to improve as well. So maybe he learns and continues to grow a year, learning from one of the best in the game right now in Phillip Rivers. It could be that they draft a quarterback in this draft. It could be that they draft a quarterback in next year's draft. Again, it's just one of those things. The Colts, they're not going to back themselves into a corner on, okay, we're going to make a decision and this is what we're going to do no matter what. They're from a roster mechanics standpoint, they've set themselves up so well outside of quarterback. And again, it's nothing they can handle with Andrew Luck deciding to retire 2 weeks before a season. But they've put themselves in such a good situation, roster construction wise, that they're just kind of, for lack of a better term, let the quarterback situation unfold organically, naturally, and kind of come to them. But that's not to say they don't love a quarterback in the second round and aren't going to use a second round pick on that guy. So I think this is a really, really fascinating draft. And I think it's going to be a draft that kind of dictates what the Colts look like for the next 4 or 5 years. Here's what I know, though. Here's what I think about the quarterback situation. I think if the Colts decide to use a draft pick within the first 4 rounds of this draft, that to me, and I don't know if you agree, that to me tells me that they think that guy is one day going to take over as the franchise quarterback. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is interesting to me.
It may not be 2021. It may not even be 2022. It may be a Patrick Mahomes situation, but just a little bit longer where they groom him and they get him up to speed to the point where one day they feel comfortable giving the offense over to that guy to be the franchise quarterback. I think.
Yeah, and it's a good situation, Matt.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I wouldn't expect the Colts to pick a quarterback round 4 or later, because I just don't think that makes sense. But I'm saying if they pick a quarterback in the first 4 rounds, then I think they have ideas of that guy taking over as the franchise guy.
Sure. Yeah, and it makes sense to me, Matt, because, you look at the quarterback position, even if you talk about other positions, say finding your left tackle of the future with Anthony Costanzo getting up there in age, the same deal here with the quarterback. The good thing is he's not going to get thrown into the fire right away. He's going to be a guy that's going to get a chance to sit behind Phillip Rivers, maybe even Jacoby Brissett for a year or two. And I think that's just the perfect situation. If the Colts do want to draft, potentially look at drafting their quarterback of the future, I really – if they do that, I think, within the first 4 rounds, I think, that's definitely something. But, I'm also interested to see, what if there's a guy like, I know the Colts have been rumored to have been talking with a guy like James Morgan out of FIU. He's a guy that I've done a lot, over the last couple days, I've really heard a lot about him. So I did some research, despite all his warts and despite all his flaws, he has a lot of the good things that you like. And he's projected to be maybe a 5th, maybe even 6th round pick. So I think it's just interesting to me to kind of see what do the Colts kind of value here? Are they going to bring in a guy, draft maybe a guy in the 3rd, 4th round, or do they think maybe we can get a guy who has those tools that we like, the big arm, the smarts, all that stuff, and try to develop him, the few years, groom him behind Phillip Rivers and Jacoby Brissett? But I don't know. It's just an interesting conversation to have. And it's certainly good to kind of have your take on it because, you're talking to the coaches, talking to the players. You kind of have an inside scoop here. And so just wanted to –
I don't know about that. I don't know about that, but yes, you're right. It's really fascinating. And you brought up offensive line and specifically, tackle. I think that's an underrated position of need for this team because you factor in,
Mhm.
yeah, it's great that Anthony Costanzo is coming back. And I thought that move allowed the Colts some flexibility this offseason in terms of free agency. I don't think the Colts are able to make that DeForest Buckner move if Anthony Costanzo decides to retire. I think they have to hang on at 13 to get, best player available at whatever position, maybe left tackle in the first round of the draft. But having him come back for 2 years really afforded the Colts some movement and to kind of go for it in free agency or at least make a trade with DeForest Buckner. But yes, I mean, Josh Andrews leaves in free agency. Joe Haig leaves in free agency. I know you signed LaRaven Clark, but right now the Colts are really kind of in need of some depth up front, especially at tackle, because with those two guys leaving, like I said, the Colts don't have a single player on their roster right now that played a snap for them on the offensive line last year outside of the starters. So, like, none of their depth is coming back from last year because LaRaven Clark was inactive most of the season, didn't play a single snap last year as a reserve offensive lineman. So that's something that I'm excited to watch and keep tabs of is how much of a need is that for the Colts and where do they prioritize that in this draft? It's great that, the Colts have their offensive line coming back intact for the third straight year, which is unheard of, especially around here. But from a depth standpoint, I mean, odds are, Cody, that you're going to need more of those guys to play next year than you did last year with all those guys, the 5 offensive line starters starting every game and only missing a handful of snaps throughout the course of a season. I mean, that just doesn't happen in the NFL. So the Colts, I mean, odds are the numbers say you're going to need more offensive line help to come in a pinch and play in 2020 than you did in 2019.
Sure. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And Chris Ballard has talked about it. He wants, not just the 5 starters, but, 6, 7, 8 offensive line starters, quality guys that can step in and fill in when needed. And so
Right.
I agree with that a lot. But yeah, man, I think that about does it, unless you have any other players, going back to the other question, that you thought were interesting interviews or one of your favorites.
So I pulled up the roster right now. So I'm just kind of going through the roster right now on guys I love talking to. Paris Campbell is a really good interview. Anthony Costanzo is a fantastic guy, and I can't believe I didn't have him top of mind. Reese Fountain is a fantastic interview as well. Incredibly candid. Talked to him last year right before training camp, and he was very honest with himself on the maturity and kind of the growth he needed from year 1 to year 2. And you saw that last year in training camp. And it was just kind of a shame that his season was over pretty much before it got going, because I thought he kind of turned the corner from a personality standpoint. Malik Hooker is really good. Justin Houston's really good. Darius Leonard's phenomenal. Kenny Moore is a really good interview as well. Quentin Nelson's a man of few words, but he's still a good guy to talk to. He gives you good perspective. Rigo Sanchez is a good guy. Grover Stewart's a funny interview. Anthony Walker, oh boy. I mean, that he is, if Anthony Walker wasn't playing football, he could probably, run for governor in the state of Florida or Indiana, because he is eloquent, very intelligent, and just has a really good head on his shoulders. So yeah, those are some of my favorite guys right now to talk to.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt, so much for coming on, man. It's going to be exciting to see how the Colts approach this draft, what they do. And thanks for all the insight, man, on the Colts and kind of your perspective coming from the voice of the Colts.
You got it. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, and hope to do it again soon.
Yeah. Stay safe, man. Appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you, Cody.